Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the Philippine National Anthem, and we invite everybody to sing along.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Bayang magiliw, pelas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisiin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bagaw, may hilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kisap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdidingning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng buwan, ating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
You may take your seats. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us once again during this Heritage Month of May. I am Miko Liwanag. I am a trustee of the Museum Foundation of the Philippines, and I'll be your moderator for this morning. Good morning as well to everybody who's joining us on the live stream. I am actually an architect, and I am an advocate for heritage conservation myself. I teach heritage conservation studies at the University of the Philippines. So these past few Saturdays, the events that we've had, which were very successful, is very close to my heart as well. So thank you for joining us. The video for our Museum Foundation. So please allow me to tell you guys more about what we actually do at the Museum Foundation. May we have our slides? So, the Museum Foundation is a dynamic organization of volunteers. We're all volunteers here. We aspire to develop even greater awareness and appreciation for the Philippines' rich artistic and cultural heritage by caring for the growth and sustainability of the museum community, especially for the National Museum, as well as museums all across the country. We were founded by civic-minded Filipinos over 30 years ago to preserve the cultural heritage of the Philippines. In the early 80s, an informal gathering of socio-cultural leaders as friends of the National Museum, Inc. That's how we started. And then in 1995, we registered with the SEC as the Museum Foundation of the Philippines. So what do? We advocate for the protection and preservation of Philippine cultural assets, properties, and sites through programs, public policies, and international or regional support. And we assist in the development and improvement of the programs of the National Museum of the Philippines, as well as museums around the country and in the museum community. So to know more about the Museum Foundation and our projects, you may visit us at www.museumfoundationph.org. And please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And before we continue, I also have some good news to share. We shared this last time, but we'll share it again. Allow us to have a little bragging rights this morning. Every year, the Creative Guild, under the Association of Accredited Advertising Agencies of the Philippines, or the 4As as they're more commonly known, holds the Kidlat Advertising Festival to celebrate creative excellence in Philippine advertising. So, by the way, the 4As is the official partner of Cannes Lion in the country. So, during the 16th Kidlat Awards, the results came out recently, and Maarte at the Pen in Full Bloom, which is our flagship program and our major fundraiser every year, employed a partner agency who created the campaign materials and entered it into the Kidlat Awards. Please watch this video to see more about this campaign that we had last year. If you didn't notice, a lot of the botanical representations were juxtaposed with the actual items for sale in the bazaar last year. The Maarte Fair is actually not your usual bazaar. It's a fundraising event that supports and promotes the Filipino culture and its heritage by showcasing the creations of contemporary Filipino designers and artisans. We are proud to share that for the first time ever in the Museum Foundation's history, we won in the Kidlat Awards for Creative Excellence, particularly the silver medal for illustration and the bronze in art direction. Okay. So we hope you will continue helping us and supporting us because we will not be here without all of you. We would like to thank the National Museum of the Philippines because the inspiration for this ad campaign actually came from their young illustrators who helped us, and we actually helped them by sending some of them to Singapore to represent the Philippines. So all of them and the National Museum are part of this award. So thank you very much, DG Jeremy and DGG Jarrell, for all of your support. We would also like to thank our advertising agency partner who came up with this campaign, TBWA, Santiago, Mangada, and Puno. On top of this ad agency has already won 11 times as Kidlat Awardee Ad Agency of the Year. So thank you, TBWA. And now, I'd like to ask the Deputy Director General of the National Museum of the Philippines, Jorel Legaspi, for his welcome remarks. Jorel.
Thank you, Miko. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and fellow advocates of heritage preservation. Our National Museum of the Philippines, together with the Museum Foundation, warmly welcomes you all to the National Museum of Fine Arts today. Thank you for joining us this Saturday morning for the final installment of our Heritage Month lecture series. Your presence underscores our shared commitment towards the preservation and appreciation of our cultural heritage. I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to the Museum Foundation of the Philippines for their unwavering support and partnership over the past 30 years. We've come a long way. Their dedication has been instrumental in bringing Filipino culture and heritage closer to diverse audiences. And we're very, very happy that we were able to inspire the Maarte Fairs campaign, and congratulations on this great achievement for the Kidlat Awards. May I also thank and recognize the 3 scholars that you generously supported and sent to Singapore to participate in the botanical exhibition. Namely, they are Isa Domingo, Larry Janko, and John Ray Caliado. Such talented individuals. I remember them presenting their report to you that one evening and how much engagement and support they felt from the Museum Foundation of the Philippines. Thank you so much for supporting them. And it warms our hearts that people like yourselves have the time to volunteer your expertise and your insights to further inspire our museum workers who, to this very day, still continue offering their talents through scientific illustration workshops, which are quite popular as a public program. Of course, we eagerly anticipate many more fruitful collaborations with the MFPI. Throughout this National Heritage Month, we have aimed to facilitate learning about different facets of heritage conservation. In our previous sessions, we were able to engage with experts in the field. Tats Manahan enlightened us on the meticulous work involved in conserving murals and ceiling paintings. Gerard Lico shared his insights on the preservation of modern heritage. And Paulo Acazaren, just last week, inspired us with the possibilities of reviving rivers as vibrant urban spaces. Today, we have the honor of hosting Attorney Mark Evidente, who will delve into the complexities of our heritage laws. Attorney Mark is a distinguished figure in the realm of cultural heritage protection, serving as a professor, researcher, and currently as the president of the Heritage Conservation Society. While I could speak at length about his contributions, I will leave the detailed introduction to our capable moderator. The significance of partnerships in heritage conservation cannot be understated. Collaborations between organizations such as the NMP and the MFPI are vital in pooling resources, expertise, and passion to safeguard our built heritage. Our built heritage, the physical manifestations of our history, culture, and identity, serves as a tangible link to our past and a foundation for our future. These structures and sites are not merely remnants of bygone eras, they are living testaments to our collective journey, offering us lessons and inspirations. By preserving our built heritage, we ensure that future generations can connect with and appreciate the stories embedded in our architectural and cultural landscapes. Such efforts foster a sense of pride and continuity, enriching our national identity and promoting cultural tourism. Today's lecture is an opportunity for both the public and our colleagues here at the NMP, as well as our fellow members of the MFPI, to gain valuable insights and inspiration. I express our deepest thanks to everyone who has contributed to making this series of talks a success, and to all of you for your continued support. Maraming salamat at mabuhay ang pamanang Pilipino.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director Jorel Legaspi, for your welcome remarks. Now I would like to introduce our MC, or moderator for today. She was the director of the National Museum from 1968 to 1971, but you wouldn't know it, and chairperson emerita of the Heritage Conservation Society. She is currently the vice president and a trustee of the Museum Foundation of the Philippines. Please welcome Ms. Gemma Cruz Araneta.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Architect Liwanag. It is a pleasure to introduce to you this morning Mark Evidente. He is a relentless advocate of heritage conservation. Mark is a lawyer and an environmental planner by profession. He is the president and CEO of 2ECO Incorporated, which has prepared strategic plans in tourism and conservation for the Philippine government, including the National Tourism Development Plan of 2023 to 2028, and the Intramuros Conservation Management Plan, and the Western Visayan Sugar Heritage Trail. Mark earned a master's in environmental policy at the Yale University, law and political sciences degrees from the University of the Philippines, and trained in UNESCO and the Getty Institute. Mark is a member of the National Committee on Monuments and Sites, a former president of the Heritage Conservation Society, and a founding trustee of the Southeast Asian Cultural Heritage Alliance. Attorney Evidente, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And thank you, of course, Gemma, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Gemma, for your invitation to speak here this morning. So it was Gemma who reached out to me and asked me to speak. And of course, thank you to the Museum Foundation, Gemma, Miko, and Sir Danny for having me here this morning. And of course, to the National Museum itself, to Director General Jeremy and Deputy Director General Jorel, for having me here this morning. Okay, so I am here to talk about settings. Okay, it is interesting that the last time I was here to talk, I think this was around 5 or 6 years ago. I think also as a forum organized by the Museum Foundation, I think. It was to talk about the DMCI Torre de Manila case. I was here to explain why the court reached that particular decision and all that. And in a way, this talk this morning builds on that. What have we learned what have we learned since then? What were the gaps? How can we address that? Because as we've seen over the last few years, we of course had DMCI. We have the threat to San Sebastian, and of course the ongoing construction. I think this is actually even finished now in Quiapo. And there are also other instances in Santa Ana, Manila Bay reclamation. We have all these developments that are affecting how we perceive and experience our heritage sites, right? One of the interesting things with the case with DMCI was that the court felt that there was something wrong but couldn't quite put a finger on it. No? The court, being a court, of course, looks at things through the law, and it depends on how the law is presented and argued before them. No? One of the reasons why I say it's interesting is because that, to my knowledge, was probably the only case that they asked civil society, other agencies, to give their opinions on this case. No? We call that amici curiae briefs. Okay? Normally, when the court asks for amici curiae briefs, no, they usually ask expert lawyers. No? So, for example, for constitutional problems, no, they might ask the late Father Bernas, for example, to submit a position on this issue. No? But this is unprecedented to my knowledge in that they asked NGOs, they asked other agencies to submit their briefs on what could possibly be wrong here. No? But again, going back, the court being a court, it has to look at the law and how the law is argued. No? Normally, when you watch all these lawyer shows on TV, there's a lot of focus on, the lawyers doing dashing things to gather evidence and things like that. No, okay. But when you argue before a court, there are two things. No, it's the facts and the law. No, you present the evidence, you try to present the facts. No, and then you try to present the law that affects that set of facts. How the other way around. No? How does the law apply to this particular set of facts? Okay. And I think this is where the issue of settings apply. Because unfortunately, it was not something that was raised in the case of DMCI. No? But it's something that we can explore today. No? And hopefully we can come to an understanding about what settings are and how we can use it. No, I assume that many of us, if not all of us, are all heritage advocates. No? And so how we can raise this issue and present this issue to stakeholders, to other government agencies, and ultimately, if it needs to go there, no, to the courts, in order for us to better protect our heritage. No? Now, because we are talking about the law, there will be a lot of words on the screen. No? It's not pictures. No? This will be the last set of pictures I have, actually, token pictures, no? So it will all be words, and I'll try my best to walk you through it, no? And highlight the necessary portions so that everyone can understand how it goes. Okay. So we start off with the idea of what is built heritage. No? This supposedly had been settled 14 years ago when the law was passed, Republic Act 10,066. No? And in that law, it defined it this way. No? Built heritage shall refer to architectural and engineering structures, such as, but not limited to, bridges, government buildings, houses of ancestry, traditional dwellings, quartels, train stations, lighthouses, small ports, educational, technological, and industrial complexes, and their settings and landscapes with notable historical and cultural significance. I intentionally went through that enumeration quite fast. No? Because it is an enumeration, and it just gives you an idea of such as, but not limited to. It's not an exclusive enumeration, right? But the reason why I went through that quickly was because if you remove that, then we start seeing settings is actually a crucial part of the definition, right? Built heritage shall refer to architectural engineering structures and their settings and landscapes with notable historical and cultural significance, right? The enumeration tends to blur all that. But if you remove the enumeration, what is built heritage? It is the structure and the setting and the landscape. Okay? Settings. Now, but what is setting? One of the things I think that maybe was not taken up in the court, no, or was not presented even as an argument, because after all, the court normally just bases it on what the arguments are presented before them. No? What is setting? Setting is not defined in the law, at least at that time. Setting was also not defined in the implementing rules of the Heritage Act. So maybe the perception was that, oh, it's not really an important aspect of the definition, so therefore it was not tackled, which was unfortunate, Okay. But setting is a technical term, especially if you understand the history, the importance that the architectural conservation field, or the heritage conservation field in general, has attached the term of settings. No? So, we have this principle formulated this way, in terms of using technical concepts. Technical terms and phrases of the law, when found in a statute, must be taken in their proper technical signification, unless there is something in the context to show that they were intended to bear a different meaning. Technical words must use their technical meaning. Okay? So what is the technical meaning of settings? Okay. So even if the law does not provide a definition the implementing rules do not provide a definition, where do we get the definition? Then we look to technical journals, technical sources. This is one of the more important documents that tries to capture and describe what we should do when we're doing heritage conservation. This is called the Burra Charter, which was drafted by the Australia chapter of ICOMOS, and it is their charter for places of cultural significance. So setting means the immediate and extended environment of a place that is part of or contributes to its cultural significance and distinctive character. So setting is really part of the built heritage because it is part of or contributes to the cultural significance and distinctive character of a site. Now, what does the Burra Charter say of what we should consider for setting? Setting may include structures, spaces, land, water, sky. The visual setting, including views to and from the place, and along a cultural route, and other sensory aspects of the setting, such as smells and sounds. Setting may also include historical and contemporary relationships, such as use and activities, social and spiritual practices, and relationships with other places, both tangible and intangible. So a lot of things can be part of settings, but basically, it is that immediate and extended environment which can comprise spaces, structures, neighboring buildings, the view to and from a place, whether you see a mountain, whether you see a sky, the alignment of buildings, the alignment of mountains, all these things can be part of a setting of a heritage site. Okay. But you'll notice that Burra is relatively new, 2013, but we go further back. In 1964, there's something called the Venice Charter, which was the International Charter for the Conservation and Restoration of Monuments and Sites, also drafted by ICOMOS. The idea of settings was already there. Here. Article 1, so in the very definition of what heritage is, no? The concept of a historic monument embraces not only the single architectural work, but also the urban or rural setting in which is found the evidence of a particular civilization, a significant development, or a historic event. This applies not only to great works of art, but also to more modest works of the past, which have acquired cultural significance with the passing of time. Okay. So it's quite clear that it's not just the structure. We're talking about where it's found, the urban or rural setting. No? And it doesn't have to be a monumental thing like the pyramids, no? But it might be a more modest work, an individual heritage house, for example. But because of the passage of time, then it might have acquired more significance. Okay? So, setting was there as a technical concept as early as 1964, perhaps even before that in other technical documents. No? Another provision, no? The conservation of a monument implies preserving a setting which is not out of scale. Okay. Wherever the traditional setting exists, it must be kept. No new construction, demolition, or modification which would alter the relations of mass and color must be allowed. Okay. So scale is also important, right? Okay. And then a monument is inseparable from the history to which it bears witness and from the setting in which it occurs. The moving of all or part of a monument cannot be allowed except where the safeguarding of that monument demands it or where it is justified by national or international interest of paramount importance. Okay. This is one of the reasons why Heritage Conservation Society has normally opposed the relocation of structures, because a structure has significance in relation to its setting, right? We cannot, I think any architect here is one of the first things that they are trained to do is site assessment, right? And how you orient your structure in relation to the environment of the site, right? Where the wind will be coming from, where the sun will rise, where it will set, right? Where the storms are likely to come from, where the water will flow. Okay? That informs design. So if you remove a structure from that context, from that setting, then a significant part of what makes that design important is lost, right? Maybe the owner built a house in order to have a wonderful view of a mountain. If you relocate it, nawala yung view. Nawala yung point of that owner building a house in that particular location and having that nice window in that orientation. Right? So this highlights why setting is important. No? The design of a place, a site, is often informed by all these considerations of location. Right? A city such as this, such as ours, Manila, has particular reasons why it exists here. Right? This is a trade route, thousands of years old. Right? This is geographically located to control the bay, to control the river, and access to the lake. Right? Those things are part of what makes Manila important. Those things are part of what made all the trade, all the politics center on Manila through over centuries. No? That's the purpose of setting. So all the monuments in Manila, in Intramuros in particular, no, take their cue from that environmental, cultural, economic setting that drove all these things to happen here. Now, these documents, the Venice Charter and the Bura Charter, came from ICOMOS. Right? I'm not an ICOMOS member myself, okay? So I'm not building up something, okay? ICOMOS stands for the International Council for Monuments and Sites, okay? Why are their definitions important? This is from the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, 1972. The World Heritage Convention, of course, is the thing that allowed us to apply for and recognize and get our Baroque churches recognized, our rice terraces recognized, and all that, no? Okay. So the Philippines is a party, a member of the convention. And so you have this entire paragraph, no? But the point here is that UNESCO, the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO, for the implementation of its programs and projects, calls upon such organizations such as ICOMOS. That's how its international preeminence is recognized. This is one of the 3 suke ng UNESCO, right? Okay. Again, UNESCO Director General shall utilize to the fullest extent possible the services of ICOMOS in preparing the committee's documentation, the agenda of its meetings, and the responsibility for implementing decisions. So ICOMOS is really one of the leading international organizations when it comes to heritage, and that's why their definitions matter. Okay. So what now? Quick review of what we've discussed so far, and now the implementing rules, the new implementing rules. So, the definition of built heritage includes settings. Settings was not defined in the law, but as a technical concept, technical definitions from authoritative sources can and should be used. And various authoritative sources, the Venice Charter, the Bura Charter, provide definitions for settings. So that's the argument why settings are such an important yet underappreciated aspect of built heritage. And it's understandable. We, stakeholders, advocates, and also the cultural agencies, have difficulties enough as it is preserving the structure itself, right? How much more difficult will the work be once we start including settings? But it's part of the mandate of what should be preserved. Okay, so there is a gap in the law, at least how it was understood, how it was argued, how it was implemented over the last 13, 14 years. And part of what had been done, the opportunity that had been presented, was that late last year, Congress passed a law called Republic Act 11961, which was called the Cultural Mapping Act. But the Cultural Mapping Act just amended 10,066, the original heritage law. Okay. There are a few other things that were amended, a few other things that were changed. Of course, as a Cultural Mapping Act, it focused mainly on cultural mapping. But the fact that there is a new law allowed us to have the opportunity to draft new implementing rules. The new implementing rules, of course, because they are intended to solve and address problems in implementation, they were really drafted to address those issues that had been encountered over the last 13 and 14 years. So, we now have a definition for setting. It is now part of the implementing rules, and we have defined setting in this way. Setting is an integral component of built heritage, and it comprises the immediate and extended environment of a place that is part of or contributes to its cultural significance. 85–90% the definition in Bura. Okay. Integral component, immediate and extended environment, contributes to its cultural significance. Now, and that wasn't the only thing that was inserted into the new implementing rules. just so that it's clear, so that we try to cover these loopholes with technical concepts, no? We included this in section 8.1 of the implementing rules, that in the absence of definitions explicitly provided under the Act or these rules, definitions from the following shall be applied. Definitions from other laws that are relevant, national and international charters on cultural heritage conservation, technical references, journals, publications, and the ordinary usage of the term in hierarchy. Okay? So in other words, if there is a concept that the law does not seem to define, we can easily look to technical sources and build our arguments based on that. Okay. So what does this mean? This means that the work of cultural agencies is now even more difficult. Okay. Why is it now even more difficult? Because in the functions of the cultural agencies to assess sites that are presumed important cultural heritage and to declare and delist sites, they also have now to consider settings. Right? So in the first one, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the presumed heritage clause. Now, the houses, structures that are over 50 years old, made by a national architect or national artist, and so on and so forth. No? But it hasn't been officially declared. No? So even in these things, now when you're dealing with a presumed heritage site, some of the things that a cultural agency might declare to protect the site while they're still studying it might also need to involve settings. No? Similarly, when they declare sites as important cultural property, settings would now need to be included. Okay. So, one of the things that was also done in the implementing rules, no, is that we kind of harmonize the procedures. Okay. Because there had been this tendency of one agency or another acting independently of the others, no, and the full cultural significance of a site couldn't be properly assessed. No? Okay. So for example, if a structure is over 50 years old, which the law says the jurisdiction belongs to the National Historical Commission. No? But what if its significance lies in other fields, such as in the performing arts? Right? Shouldn't the cultural center have a say? Right? So these are things that, these gaps in the law, how we try to reconcile them. No? We tried to address it also through the implementing rules and regulations. No? So now, the procedure for declaration and delisting and lifting of presumptions is now harmonized. No? I myself thought that there was just one procedure. Apparently there are two. And there could be more depending on which agency is doing the assessment. No? So, but now it should be harmonized and centralized in the NCCA. So anyone who has a petition has to file it in the NCCA. No? And let the NCCA sort it out. Because then it will be taken up in the board and they can, oh, this is relevant to you, right? This is relevant to you. Then it goes to the different cultural agencies. And it also goes to the committees. Because there are also these committees within NCCA of stakeholders in the different arts and cultural fields. So of course, those stakeholders, that's why the NCCA was created, to bring those stakeholders into the conversation. So the NCCA should now inform the other cultural agencies and its committees. And then now this entire process should involve the stakeholders. The process is detailed in the IRR and I don't need to get into that right now. No. And the agencies can render separate decisions regarding their own expertise and mandate. No. So even if one agency says, there's nothing really important there, the other agencies can. Right? Because each agency has their own technical competence, right? You have an agency for this, an agency for that. No? So all those different agencies have the opportunity to render their own decisions on any particular site. And that can also include decisions on settings. Okay. So, and one of the most important things is that in the rules and regulations, in the procedure for declaration, delisting, and lifting the presumption, the agency shall state clearly its consideration of the position paper submitted and its findings of facts as regards the cultural significance of a property. So it can't be arbitrary. No? If different stakeholders make this argument or raise different arguments, the agency has to discuss which arguments are relevant, which arguments are not. So that if a site is indeed declared significant, then there is a clear assessment and understanding of what is significant in this site. Similarly, on the other side, if a site is declared not significant, the decision has to be so clear as that the assessment of whether something is significant or not should be apparent and understandable by all the stakeholders involved. Right? And that should actually help solve some problems, no? Because if, for example, I file a petition, and then I file a petition, and then my petition is ruled by an agency saying that, your argument is not that important. I'm sorry, it's not that important. Because the significance here is really only local. It's not national. Okay? So if it's local, then let the LGU take care of it. If it's national, then it becomes a national a thing that the national cultural agencies would take care of. So then I'm guided, right? My argument is properly assessed, and I'm guided on the proper course of action. No? So if the argument is clearly laid forth, or rather, if the decision is clearly laid forth, assessing all the different arguments, then it guides the stakeholders, and it also guides how it's going to be implemented, and it also guides if it's going to be reviewed by a court, then the basis for the decision can be properly assessed also by another court. And so now, ultimately, in bringing all these procedures together, the reason why I'm saying that the work of the cultural agencies has expanded, more difficult, because not only do they have to deal with these procedural requirements, but their decisions ultimately should now include clear statements on the cultural significance of the site itself, identifying its key components. For example, you can't just say that this site is important for, let's say, architecture, contribution to architecture. It has to be because this particular technique or these particular design elements were innovative or embodied the technology of that time or something, no? So it's not just, so the essence of what is significant is clearer, no? But it can also, and should, in my view, include implications of the site. It might imply things on local zoning. It might imply things on streetscapes, no? Like maintaining a particular facade or maintaining a particular height. No? Requirements for infrastructure, viewpoints, view sheds, even practices and traditions. No? For example, if a religious icon is carried from one structure to another structure, then that path is part of what makes the site important. It's part of the setting, right? So that ultimately is the case for settings. No? Settings involves the immediate and extended environment that contributes to the significance of a site. Okay. And the law might not have properly discussed it before 2014, no? But now at least in the new implementing rules, an argument can be made for settings, because now it is in the implementing rules, and it allows us to introduce the arguments from technical experts when we lay forth an argument of why the setting of a particular site is important. Okay? So with that, thank you very much for your time and your attention this morning.
Thank you very much, Attorney Evidente, for that very informative and very relevant talk. Now I'll invite Attorney to please take a seat on stage, and Ms. Gemma will introduce our reactors for this morning.
Thank you, Miko. We have two reactors this morning. Architect Arnulfo Fajardo Dado. He's an architect and a museum curator and chief of the Architectural Arts and Built Heritage Division of the National Museum of the Philippines. Prior to this, he also served as chief of the Restoration and Engineering Division of the National Museum and a senior restoration architect at the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. So, Architect Dado, please take your seat. And our second reactor, hey, nasaan na yan? Oh. Our second reactor is Architect Jason Portem. He is a conservation architect. He is the former chairperson of the United Architects of the Philippines, especially Council on Architectural Heritage Conservation, and is currently the Deputy Executive Director of the Center for Filipino Architecture of the United Architects of the Philippines. So, Architect Portem. May we hear from Architect Dado?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mark, for the very enlightening lecture related to settings. In the previous lecture of Dr. Lico, a question was raised related to if the Torre de Manila could speak sort of, what does it convey? Siguro I would share the same question to you first, but before you answer that, partly you have discussed it nga. What does the particular structure conveys in relation to how efficient or how effective the law is and how maybe the implementation of the law? Kung meron man tayong pagkukulang sa law or partly also sa implementation of the law. But sinagot mo na yan kanina partly, pero you could elaborate more on that. No, that's one of my questions. Importante yung setting, but then I suppose hindi nga kulang. I agree with you in your presentation. Kulang yung definitions, but then you provided it in the implementing rules and regulations, which is good. But still, in the implementation of certain issues related to settings, I found when I browsed through the law, the 11961, parang kulang naman yung provisions, especially so na may contributions that we could properly implement the preservation of heritage structures or built heritage, particularly in the issue of settings. For one, if I may cite, no? Like for example, traditional practices, traditional building practices, especially intangible heritage, like in relation to the rice terraces of the Cordilleras, malaking issue yan, especially cultural landscape siya, the setting issue. I agree with you on that. Pero ang isang importante dyan siguro, the provisions on what the law provides so that the subject heritage, like cultural landscape or traditional heritage like the rice terraces, kung wala yung certain provisions like one, incentives that could incentivize traditional building practices, traditional source of materials, and the artisans, hindi rin natin ma-achieve yung sinatawag mong setting. Like, saan mo kukunin yung materials related to like thatch roofing para ma-achieve mo yung relationship of structures in relation to other structures in environment. Saan mo kukunin yung if you will not sustain the traditional practitioners or artisans in the preservation of the walled terraces, hindi mo rin ma-achieve yung setting. So, to briefly summarize, parang it's not enough that we define setting in the international and the implementing rules and regulations, but rather, I guess we should elaborate more on certain provisions na wala sa law. Hindi malinaw sa law yung issue on buffer zones. But if you will review even the World Heritage Sites operational guidelines, specific and explicit yung issue of the buffer zones. In our law, wala yun. So, magkakaroon tayo talaga ng problema. If you have definitions of setting, but then wala kang definitions of buffer zone and how you implement such in relation to the built heritage, hindi na natin ma-achieve yung sinasabi mong settings. But in other laws, like the NIPAS, if you will review, merong provisions of buffer zones and even protected area systems, malinaw na yan, no? But hindi lang na-improve or hindi lang nakascade or in relation to built heritage sites. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so a bit of a disclaimer also with the law itself. No? One of the reasons why it is referred to as the Cultural Mapping Act, no? Because really what Congress focused on was the cultural mapping provisions. No? So a lot of the changes in the law itself, aside from the cultural mapping portion, were minimal or because the instructions we got from Congress. Now, I was one of the resource persons in the hearings. No, was that let's keep it achievable muna what we can complete now. No? And cultural mapping was on the table, okay? Because one of the temptations tried to push a law that has your entire wish list, but then it's not going to pass because there'll be so many debates. No? So the instruction is, okay, let's just focus on this and then let's fix what we can. No? Pero yung mga masyadong controversial, wag muna, let's set that aside for a separate date. No? So that's why the law is what it is. No? But what could be addressed through implementing rules, that's why yung implementing rules po ngayon parang 150 pages, okay? Because all the different laws on heritage, no? From the enumerations of all the, from presidential decrees and republic acts from the past all the way to the present, and syempre in the last few decades, dumami yung mga batas that touch on heritage. I didn't even know that there's a Presidential Car Protection Museum Act, no, for example. No? But the research, meron palang ganito, okay? That was all brought together, and then so an effort was in the implementing rules was to try to bring all of these together and find out how it can be implemented more. So it's a stopgap, yes, no? And it does await, it does need more substantial changes on the law, but at least I hope this is enough of a window of opportunity for us to build these arguments that, yes, settings could be created, no? And even in relation to that, you can put the buffer zone as part of the setting, no? As a way to regulate the settings. No? So that's where it is right now. No? That's also an insight into the legislative process, no? And also the rulemaking process. No? So yun pa yung a bit of a background also to the drafting of 11961.
Thank you, Mark. Now, Attorney Portem, you have the floor.
Okay. Isang mapagpalang umaga po sa inyong lahat. at binabati ko po ang lahat ng maligayang buwan ng pamana. After hearing the discussion or the talk of Attorney Mark, I remember in 2017 when I and Sir Ivan Henares was sent by the NCCA to Baguio City to talk with their LGU or their council. They're asking us what they can do about the Session Road, because obviously the Session Road during that time is already deteriorating, given the fact that the architecture in Session Road are rich in Art Deco style and other modern architecture. And when Attorney Mark said that it's all about setting, and that's the same exact word that we told to the council, na the significance of Session Road is the setting. It is not just by transforming a single building. It's magkakasama yan. It's a package. Hindi mo pwedeng gawin ang isang conservation sa isang structure just to say na we started a conservation effort. I'm always telling with my students before, when I was teaching architecture, na if you work with conservation of any heritage building, you first consider the setting. Kasi may may reaction. Kung ano ang gagawin mo sa architecture na yan, sa heritage building na yan, there's always a reaction with the setting. Just like for example, if ang Metropolitan Theater, dumaan yan sa napakaraming repair before itong recent na restoration, pero bakit nag-fail? It's because of the setting. Kumbaga, ginamot mo yung sugat, pero hindi mo nilinis yung paligid. If you have to remember na para gumaling totally or fully yung sugat, you have to clean first the setting. And you have to maintain it clean. So that's the reason why the Metropolitan Theater, yung mga previous repairs niya, parang naging parang band-aid solution na lang. Until such time na natenga siya ng matagal, and then until nagkaroon ng massive effort to restore the Metropolitan Theater. And nakita niyo naman siguro yung paligid ng Metropolitan Theater, malinis. So imagine if ang ganda ng pagka-restore ng Met, pero nandun pa rin yung rugby boys, nandun pa rin yung mga snatchers, nandun pa rin yung mga illegal settlers. So, do you think na magfa-function well ang Metropolitan Theater? So, setting is very important in conservation. It's not always taking a design para ma-preserve or ma-continuous mo yung buhay ng building. Ang structure kasi pag ni-restore mo at hindi mo consider yung effect niya sa community or environment and the other way around, believe me, the conservation na ginawa mo is just a white elephant.
I think relating that also, yung settings can lay the case for adaptive reuse, diba? Like, if the community has moved on, the surrounding area has moved on, the setting has moved on, then you can still preserve the structure, but then adaptive reuse na to something that is more relevant to the community, diba? So this is how the structure and the setting, it's a symbiotic relationship, diba? It's really part of that ecosystem of how heritage structures live in a city and a community.
If I may, Attorney Mark, meron akong question. Kasi me myself is always invited by UEP chapters and other groups, even LGUs, to talk about the basics of conservation. Hindi nag-fail to It's always, there's one person that will ask me, ano ba yung naging power ng heritage law after 14 years? In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was with Architect Bernadette in Iloilo. The city architect there said that it cannot be implemented until ma-amend daw yung heritage law. So, I don't know, baka hindi siya updated na amended. But I agree with her in some ways. Kasi I strongly believe personally, that heritage law must be translated locally. Ang heritage law is a basic law that can be adopted by every locality. Why? Because the conservation guidelines of vegan cannot be used in Baguio. It cannot be used in Cebu because, again, they have different settings.
Okay, very interesting and also very concerning discussion about the plight of our heritage sites because, as you all know, most of our sites are already in danger, but more so the setting around it, as our reactors and our speaker and Ms. Gemma also have mentioned. I would also like to, at this point, bring up the fact that when Attorney Mark and I were part of the technical working group for the Philippine Heritage Charter, we had to revise even the title. Because at first we were saying, what is this charter for? Is it just for the site? And then of course we said, no, it's for including the setting or the fabric. That's why the Philippine Heritage Charter is the Philippine Heritage Charter for heritage sites and spaces and their associated environments. We figured if we include all of those terminologies, or those terms rather, then wala na sigurong makakalusot na sabihin hindi kasama ang setting sa dapat na i-preserve natin. So at this point, we would like to open the floor to your questions. I see a lot of hands. I see Alex, as usual, as our starter. Alex, you could maybe go to the microphone and ask your question.
Good morning. I'm Alex Escucha. I would like to make this context setting in two contexts. First, I was chairman of the China Bank Centennial Committee, which restored the Binondo Heritage Building for our centennial in 2020. And this year, actually, is the 100th anniversary of the building itself. Secondly, the ancestral house of my wife is located in Santa Ana, the Plaza Hugo mismo. No? So there are two separate questions. For example, when I do the tours to the museum, which I still do to now, ngayon ko lang na-open yung mind ko na, kasi the first question, Attorney Mark, is, ano yung exact definition? May definition ka kanina ng immediate. Pero yung extended, I think it's related to the question of reactor, the first reactor. Yung ba yung ibig sabihin ng buffer zone? No? Kasi, for example, the reason why I'm raising that on the Binondo side is, I was raising the issue that the Binondo Heritage Building is sustainable, is authentic, and resilient. The only thing I was not able to do was to put up solar panels on top because there are 340 stories towers around it. So if I use that setting, edi dapat wala yung tatlong towers na yun, but private property rights yun eh, di ba? So how can you settle that? In that context, pag sinama mo yung argument na yung Torre de Manila, alayo-layo naman, di ba? It's a few hundred meters away. And if I take the photo of Rizal Monument 20 degrees to the right, mawawala yung Torre de Manila from the background. Di ba? So an argument can be made for that. If you apply that argument to the Santa Ana, where Santa Ana Church is the first Franciscan church outside of Intramuros, and the objection to the SunTrust property na pag tumayo yun, tapos kunan mo ng picture from Pedro Hill, kasi dulo yun, talagang masasapawan yung church, di ba? So, does the same argument apply? But what is exactly the definition of that extended vicinity or the buffer zone which our friend here says hindi siya properly defined? So, to me, it's an eye-opener in the Binondo setting na talaga wala ka na magagawa. But in the Santa Ana Church vicinity, right, Plaza Hugo, our goal is to tama nga na when we restore it, is not just, for example, restore the house itself, pero pati yung linya ng mga katabi niya, because it's as defined, because the Heritage Conservation Society of Santa Ana is quite active. So medyo nagbabantay talaga sila. But does that give me, as an owner, the flexibility na I will maintain the facade, but I will do like what the city of government of Zamboanga said na, they have government city hall na heritage yung look, pero simento. Am I allowed to do that? Second, there is a suggestion for me na restore the 2 floors according to that, and then I will install another 3rd floor, but still try to be faithful to the structural theme of that place. Is that allowable under the law? Diba? And a 3rd question, sa Binondo, we have 2 buildings. The 1920 building and a building B, which was acquired in 1968. Under the presumption clause, that's supposed to be presumed heritage already, and you're not supposed to demolish it already. Pwede ka mag-argue, hindi, ni-restore ko na ito faithfully yung 100 years. Pwede ko nang gawin to, I can put up another 40-story tower because everybody else has done that. Is that allowed? Sorry for the long question.
No, actually, I have one answer to all of that. It all depends. No, but really, no. You did give several examples, no. And just like what Jason pointed out, no, the setting for every site is different. No? Like he pointed out that the solution in Vigan is different from the solution for Manila, from the solution in Cebu. No? Because every site has a different setting. No? And so what might, and I'm not speaking na conclusively, na wag niyo sabihin na, sabi ni Mark, pwede ganyan. No? Okay. But what might be the viewpoint, for example, for Monument A might need a different viewpoint for Monument B. Diba? And if you have a different viewpoint, if the viewpoint requires a setting that sets limits behind that, diba? I'm not even saying that all sites need to have anti-photobomber measures. Diba? It all depends on a case-to-case basis. Diba? Yung with Rizal kasi, this is our national monument, diba? Of our national hero. No? And I understand that it's far. But that goes to what is or should be the technical assessment on the part of the cultural agencies. Diba? What makes it important? Okay. Now, yung aspect of extended environments, again, it also depends on what makes it important. No? If, for example, we were looking at Intramuros, not just for the fact that it was the old city and all the government, for its inherent significance of what happened inside Intramuros. No? But you can think of its relationship to the neighboring communities, right? So that might be part of the extended environment. But you can also think of Intramuros, na yung significance niya is not just as the old city, no? But you can think of it as fortifications of Manila Bay. Then you're now talking about Corridor, Fort San Pedro, right? I think there are 2 or 3 other forts, no? Around Manila Bay. No? Then the extended environment becomes different. It goes back to what's the technical assessment. What is the significance we're focusing on? And that's what would change the perspective of what the setting implies. Diba? Yung view sheds, no, I had a few pictures and I decided to, no. I think one of the main examples of view sheds that we look at, or viewpoints, no, is because let's say with Rizal Park, diba? There are parallels with how the National Mall in Washington, D.C. is laid out. Diba? And they have very strict urban planning guidelines that nothing is supposed to get higher than a certain number of floors, right? And you can see, diba, that in that landscape, it's really Capitol Building, Washington Monument, Lincoln Memorial. These are the things that dominate the landscape, right? Okay. So the settings is inherent and built into the city or urban guidelines, no? Urban planning guidelines. But you can also think na, halimbawa, Vatican, no? I don't know if Italy has a comprehensive urban plan, but they do, okay. Oh. But, you know, yung from St. Peter's, diba, looking out over the square, no? And then you can see how disciplined and how the scale really matches that. No? So it's a case-to-case where the viewpoint is coming from. No? But that's why I said that the challenge really goes back to the cultural agencies, no? Because their technical assessment is so important. No? And so our role as stakeholders, no, is really to make these arguments when we submit position papers. No? They have to be more meaty, no? Or more or framed more perhaps in the technical language of conservation, or to justify why certain things should be done certain ways. And hopefully the cultural agencies would respond appropriately.
Thank you, Attorney. I guess that's the drawback of being late in the game when we're legislating these guidelines, especially for government or public-owned places like Luneta, Rizal Park. If our urban planning and legislation was already in place early on, specifically stating that within a certain line of sight, certain angles from a certain point, there should be no building higher than this. So therefore, no matter how many hundreds of meters or even kilometers away the structure is from Luneta itself, if it falls within that parameter, then it should not be allowed. Unfortunately, it was not done that way, so now we have problems like this. So more questions, please. Please go ahead, just go. And by the way, I invite our reactors to also chime in if you want to answer any of the questions as well. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Attorney, you mentioned about the newly amended law. There's a certain clause also there that is not only about built heritage, but even the renaming of streets is not under the purview of local legislation. So is that the way now we can, as Ambeth Ocampo stated, we can reclaim back the historical significance of places? Because, for example, Binondo, certain streets were named after certain politicians. Is there now a way we can maybe revert that back to like how it was done before? Because you stated that built heritage is part of setting. I think we could also say that naming of places is also part of that the endeavor. Thank you.
I'll need to revisit exactly how the provision is structured now. But what I do know, no, is that if you're going to name a street or a place, give it a new name, but it has a historic name, then you have to go and clear it with the National Historical Commission. No? I am not so sure if there's a procedure to bring it back to an older name. No? But I don't see why, for example, that case cannot be made in the local city council. Diba? Balik natin sa dati, and then ilagay na lang natin yung pangalan ng former politician sa ilalim in parentheses. Diba? Diba? Yeah, okay. Because if you know, I think you can do that, no? Because ultimately these things are local decisions, diba? Pwede lang siguro kung national road, then you have. But there are different processes for these things, no? But ultimately, as with a lot of things with heritage, no, it starts with the citizens, the residents, filing a petition somewhere. Diba?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And also, if I may add to that, sorry, marami rin akong comments. But as citizens, not just to file petitions, but hopefully as citizens, if we work for developers or if we own development companies, sana wag na natin pilitin na ipuwersa natin na mag-develop tayo dun sa mga setting ng mga heritage sites natin. Ang dami namang ibang lugar na pwedeng pagtayuan ng mga building, di ba? Bakit kailangan dun pa dun sa may historic site? Anyway, next question.
Magandang umaga ho sa panel. I'm Paul Tuazon, I'm a history student in UPD. So basically, my question would be, following the given technical definition of the word setting in the context of heritage conservation, then this is a case-to-case basis po since sabi niyo kanina sa talk. Then how do we settle the existing problem of conserving, saving, and revitalizing the dilapidated Paco station and I think the other station in Caloocan? Since I think following the construction of SM, the expressway, it was a little bit problematic for historical conservation kasi halos natabunan ho yung sa Paco and the other station was almost napakamalapit na sa expressway which is very problematic. Thank you po.
I don't know anything about that problem, so I can't give an opinion.
Just comment, no? I think yun nga yung issue related to, although we have definition, malinaw kunyari, guided na tayo with definition of setting. But then sa law naman, may mga loopholes pa rin related to like there's no such thing as how do you integrate conservation in planning. So mga ganong principle, which is in relation to planning, when you do planning, tapos you're pro-heritage ba, of course, ang approach mo is you integrate heritage conservation into your planning. Pero if you are planners, the policy makers in our cities, municipalities, wala sa kanilang mindset yun. So hindi natin, magkakaroon tayo palagi ng ganung problema. Although may mga declared structures tayo, well-defined yung setting, immediate setting, pero paglabas dun sa territorial jurisdiction ng property owner or within the territorial jurisdiction naman ng city, hindi nila kino-consider yung ganung approach. So talagang magkakaroon tayo palagi ng ganung problema. Isa pa rin sa issue nun, hindi naka-integrate yung anong definition of, or the principles of integrated conservation when it comes to planning, development planning. So wala yun. Apart from another yung sinasabi ko incentives.
But one of the things with the implementing rules, no? And actually it's an oversight on my part. I apologize, Miko, that we worked together on the Philippine Heritage Charter, no? And I forgot to cite it as one of the authoritative definitions that we could have possibly used, no? The law is not intended to address every single detail or situation, right? Because, you know, like, how do like a few hundred words address the situations of millions of people, tens of thousands of barangays in our country? Diba? No. So really, implementation is really the challenge, diba? Implementation. But in the implementing rules, precisely to guide the implementation, no, is that we made reference to a lot of technical guides, authoritative manuals. No? The charters that I cited are just two of them. Miko cited a third. No? That should inform the experts doing assessment or the professionals doing the assessment. No? And of course, the professionals should admit, okay, this is beyond my scope. We need to get an expert on conservation. No? That's one aspect. No? And then, in defining this issue about settings, no? I want to be clear now. Again, it also does not. It's not intended to solve every situation, because, as I said, there are two things when you want to make an argument before a government agency, a court. No, is that you need to cite the law. And so talking about settings at least expands the laws that we can cite. But you also need the facts. What are the facts that back your argument of cultural significance? Diba? So if you want to say that this site is important, okay, tell me, prove to me why it's important. And then it also follows na, if it is important, does it also follow that it is important enough that the settings should also be regulated? No? Because I think, based on this, no, the cultural agency can say, not just the house, but the street has to be protected. No? But of course, that will mean that the consultations should have involved the LGU. That's why stakeholder consultations are important. No? But, pati yung street, pwede rin magsabi yung cultural agencies, okay, starting from now on, ito yung zoning nyo, dapat may height restrictions, may massing restrictions. No? The opportunity actually is quite broad. No? But again, it's all based on the facts. No? All based on the facts, the argument that can be made in order to activate the law. You have to get your facts first. You have to make your case of what is important, because then you can squeeze it and fit into these categories that the law provides. Diba? Yeah.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Morning, sir. My question is, what legal instrument are used to prosecute crimes against cultural heritage? Katulad po dun sa Rizal Park at saka dun sa mga conflict zones, sir. And the other one, sir, is how do the international and national law address on the repatriation of tangible heritage, sir? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Let's see.
Touchy subject.
Wait. Okay. Sorry, sir. Could you just repeat it? I jumped ahead in my thought. Sir, yes. Can you repeat your question? Oh, sorry.
How do these sites? What is the penalty or any parang penalty for going against the laws, and then also repatriation of?
Sige. Oh yeah. Thank you. And so there are penalties in the law. Okay, there are penalties in the law. The reason why no one gets prosecuted is that usually it has to be a cultural agency that has to file the complaint. Okay? Because usually the cultural agency will issue cease and desist order. Or, ako nag-issue ng declaration yan eh. Ba't nyo ginaba? Diba? So which entity was the one that was most offended? Diba? The agency. So who is the one who was the best positioned to file a case in court against the offender? It should be the agency. No. Now, to a certain extent, no, residents, stakeholders are also affected when a heritage site is demolished, no? Okay. Or is damaged, no? But then we all know that going to court requires money, no? And advocates like myself and others, we only have so much bandwidth, no, space on our to pursue cases, no. So that's also another problem, no. Who is willing to fund or support cases to bring violators to justice, ba? Okay. And then, so yan yung problem with penalties. There are penalties, 10,066 already provided for them, but it has to be that someone has to bring the violator to court. Okay. I think the only case is the one in Taal. But I think that is still ongoing, right?
Well, it took us so many years to fight that case in Taal because like a parish council built an adoration chapel right in the middle of the inner patio. So we asked the late Father Bobby Perez of the Benedictine Order, like an advisor. So he explained about the settings and the spaces, and that this chapel was really violating that space of the church. And they said, ay, paano nandyan na? No? So, no, one of the judges died, Bobby Perez died, and I don't know if that chapel is still there.
That's another problem with our legal system, right?
We need younger people to take up the reins.
Yes, sir.
Again,
So,
go ahead, please.
Na-mention kasi ni Attorney Mark sa ni Miss Gemma yung case. Tama naman yun na which agency gets offended with the actions of certain personality or group sila dapat yung mag-file yung case. And I remember one case, there's a town in Rizal province, na they demolished an old municipal hall despite the fact na merong clamor yung mga tao. They keep on campaigning na to stop the demolition of the building, and it's during the pandemic. But the reason of the mayor is that we're going to use the property to build a COVID-19 specialized hospital, and the NHCP issued a cease and desist order na to stop the demolition. But sorry to say that the LGU ignored. And now in the NHCP, as yung huling pagkakaalam ko is the NHCP filed a case administratively doon sa mayor nung town na yon. And ang double whammy pa yon dahil natalo pa yung mayor sa next election. Yun masaklap doon. Natalo yung mayor. But the thing there is, may problema talaga sa simula pa lang. Ano yon? Ang laging problema natin sa conservation is just we are reactive. Nagre-react na lang tayo pag wala na o kaya nandiyan na. Pero nung example, yung sample ni Sir na Paco train station, for so many years, nakatenga lang yan. But wala naman nagre-react, walang, di ba, anong ginawa mo before? Nung nandiyan na, in trouble na, ayan na, keyboard warrior na tayo lahat. Support our heritage. Nung pawala na. So, I'm calling the attention of everyone na nanonood na please stop being just a reactive, be proactive. Dapat simula pa lang, you are protecting your heritage na para maiwasan na yung mga ganong senaryo. Para hindi na tayo dumating pa sa korte or sa kasuhan. Kasi no one will value the heritage of a place, only the community. Di ba? I cannot convince you that our revolving tower in Pasig is significant because you are not from Pasig. But because I am from Pasig, I am the one who's going to protect that revolving tower. So, ganun din sa inyo. Kung ano yung setting ninyo, kung ano yung kulturang meron kayo, at yung heritage na meron kayo, you are the only one that can preserve that. And when is the time? Today. Not tomorrow, not next year, but today.
I totally agree to be proactive. Hindi yung kung kailan too late na. And then also, I think for the longest time, 2,000 or 10,000 pesos lang yata yung penalty sa mga ganitong long ago. Kaya multi-billion peso companies don't care and they just go for the fine. But anyway, I have to follow up lang on that question, we have a question on Facebook Live. What about those structures that have been plucked out of their setting and have been transferred to another place? Let's call it Bataan. You know, what about that in the guise of heritage conservation? I think that's a very relevant issue that is that needs to be discussed, and a lot of people need to know what is the right way of looking at this issue. Anybody in the panel would like to comment on that particular case, which shall not be named?
Inaabangan ko talaga may magtanong yan eh. Kasi, again, we're discussing about setting. Those houses that were transferred on that theme park, it's a theme park. It's not a heritage town. It's not even a heritage village. It's a theme park. Okay? Those houses were built, those buildings are not meant to build along a coastline. The materials of those houses cannot survive yung salt air. Those houses na kinuha daw sa junk shop to assemble there and then they call it conservation, lalo lang nilang sisirain or paiksiin yung buhay ng materials. Again, we're talking here about 100 to 100 years old materials. Hindi ito nabili sa hardware. Ito ay pinaghirapan ng mga artisans natin to produce. And then i-expose mo sa salt air. Di ba? So, setting is very important. I understand that the intention of the theme park is good. We have to what do you call this? to continue promote our culture and heritage. Pero medyo alangan lang doon sa execution nung project. So, mahalaga sana na yung setting is ma-consider. Imagine one of the houses there is from Binyan and used to be the house where Doña Chodora or Jose Rizal's mother lived. So, imagine nyo lang si Doña Chodora, yung kaluluwa niya naliligaw. Kasi yung bahay niya sa Binyan, nasa Bataan na pala. So, for how many years na siyang homeless? And we are talking here about the spirit of the place. And literally, the spirit of Doña Chodora is missing.
Okay. Well, Architect Fortem, paano ngayon yan? Yung mga gumawa ng theme park dyan sa, anong pangalan nun? Siya ngayon yung head ng human settlements. Wag mo nang sagutin. So, the young lady, please.
Nakaka-trigger. Okay, next question, please.
Just wondering, in the news, in the posts, 2 houses have been revamped and presented open to the public. I just don't know how the public can get to them. At in Malacanang, the La Peral Mansion and the Goldenberg Mansion. What is your thinking about that? I mean, it was not transferred out of the space, but it has been totally revamped and repurposed. And my second question is, I understand that other structures will be built around the area of Malacanang. So that's not a public park, but it is a site of the people. And I'm just wondering what LGU would have purview over Malacanang and the park, and what your idea is about the new renovated mansions there.
I've not been inside Malacanang in a while. Okay, but I understand that it's within the compound of Malacanang, right? And not just the broader area that gets gated off, right? So if it's in the compound proper of Malacanang, then it's really under the office of the president, I assume. No, one. So in that regard, my sense is that as long as these buildings continue living and continue providing a purpose, a function, then that's great. No, I don't know the extent to which it's been changed and whether that change is relevant. No, I don't know enough to comment about that. No, but I think the fact that I think even at some point these buildings had even been abandoned already or unoccupied. So the fact that nagkaroon ng bagong buhay yung building, no, I think that's a good thing. No, okay. Yeah. Building other structures, okay. So it depends on the setting. So and again, we go back to the setting. No? It depends on whether there's enough space, what the scale of what will be built is. No, it again depends on everything. No, so like if these structures will be necessary to continue using these other 2 buildings, and but it is a settings question, but we don't know enough to say whether. What kind of setting should be conserved and whether the proposed plans are compatible with that setting. I don't know enough, no, but it can still be used subject to certain conditions. No? Yeah.
Okay. We have one question which is posted on our live stream. I'll try to summarize it regarding the Art Deco Iloilo Central Market, which was recently demolished. While it itself was an unmarked, undesignated structure, it supposedly sits inside the heritage zone of the commercial district. So the first question is, what happens in those cases where the site, the structure itself is not a designated site, but it is located within supposedly a heritage zone? You can verify. I'm not familiar if this is actually correct or the facts in this case. So that's one. And then the second question is, yeah, what are the effects of demolishing an unmarked structure? If it is actually within a heritage zone, how will that affect everything?
These are things that I do know, and so